Thanks, Robert. The dog gets more attention than I do these days. Always gets a mention. Let's kick off our guest speaker program for the conference. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today, and our first speaker is Julian Cribb. Now, the message that he's portraying today is feeding 10 billion people in the late 21st century will be the greatest challenge humanity and science has ever faced. And food demand will double by 2060, while the resources to produce food will become scarce. So we must think not only of farming systems, but food itself to develop a new global diet and agriculture. So Julian is a fellow of the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering, and from 1996 to 2002 was Director National Awareness for Australia's National Science Agency, the CSIRO, where he oversaw a 150% growth in the organisation's media profile. A journalist since 1969, he was editor of the National Farmer and Sunday Independent newspapers, editor-in-chief of the Australian Rural Times, and the chief of the Australian Agricultural News Bureau. For 10 years he was agricultural correspondent, science and technology correspondent, and scientific editor of the Australian, and he also edits sciencealert.com.au, the nation's leading scientific news site. His published work includes more than 7,000 print articles and 1,000 broadcasts, and I'm sure you can add a few more broadcasts in the last month or so. He's definitely had significant media attention over the last month, and he is the author of The Coming Famine, Risks and Solutions for the Global Food Challenge of the 21st Century. So let's welcome Julian Cribb. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour and a privilege to be asked to speak with you today. Make no mistake, this is the greatest challenge in human history: how to feed over 10 billion people sustainably for more than half a century. Now, tonight there will be 242,000 more people to dinner than there were last night. We're all aware of the 9 billion figure that people keep talking about, but the human race does not stop growing on the 1st of January 2051. It keeps on going, probably to 10, maybe 11 billion people, and more babies will be born, but at a slower rate, but people will be living a lot longer. That's the other side of that equation that often people ignore. The world economy is going to keep on growing. So China, India, Brazil, of course they're all eating more protein. And that's where the global prediction that the global demand for food is likely to double is coming from. By 2065, we will need about 600 quadrillion calories every single day to feed us all. And it is whether we can achieve and sustain that mighty harvest on which our future as a civilization rests. My second point is that we face critical limitations, not just one or two, but a whole constellation of them, all feeding into one another. There are looming scarcities of just about everything that you need to grow good quality food. It's very hard to solve any individual one of these problems without impacting all of the others. That is why this is not a simple problem, it is a wicked problem. Okay, you can't just double yields. What do you do if the oil runs out or something like that? So it's all connected together. And this is the bit that I believe the governments of the world do not get at the moment. Okay, by 2050, nearly 8 billion people will be living in cities. Okay, and they will consume 2,800 cubic kilometres of fresh water, which is more than the whole of irrigation farming worldwide uses today. Many cities are already meeting those needs by stealing the farmers' water. And then there is the slice of farm water that climate change is already stealing. Rainfall from the world's great grain bowls, and don't we know about that in Australia, evaporation from soil and dams, dwindling lakes, shrinking groundwater, or the loss of ice pack from mountain regions. Yes, the Himalayan glaciers are melting. The only argument is how quickly. And the North China Plain is running out of groundwater. Those two regions together feed 1.7 billion people today, and they must feed twice that many in time to come. So a large part, maybe 2/3 of the world's population will be living in conditions of acute water scarcity by the mid part of this century. International Water Management Institute Director General Colin Charteris, an Aussie, says basically current estimates indicate we will not have enough water to feed ourselves in 25 years' time, at least if we don't change the way we do some things. Every country in the world that uses groundwater to grow food is running out. You know, we are mining groundwater. The Chinese are mining it, the Americans are mining it from the Ogallala aquifer. So this is a resource that we have desperately overstressed. Immense water bodies like Lake Chad. There, that lake supports 90 million Africans, and it is 90% gone in the last 25 years. You know, we've seen the Aral Sea stuff, but it's happening everywhere. There's a big debate about a lake that's disappearing in Iran at the moment, you know. The lakes and the rivers are drying up because we're taking the water out of them. The cup of coffee, the reason is basically that our food, our diet, is incredibly water intensive. Today we use collectively 7,500 cubic kilometres of water a year. That's the whole human usage. But 2/3 of that is related to food, and you can see in the table on the right-hand side there, you know, the very high water intensity involved in modern agriculture. And that cup of coffee you had takes 14 buckets of water just to grow the beans. Okay, so a very large part of our water use is around food. And if we take water from agriculture, then guess what's going to happen? Just to put our personal consumption in perspective for you, over a lifetime, each one of us here will consume enough water to float that aircraft carrier. Okay, that's 7 billion aircraft carriers. That's quite a lot. Today, according to the latest survey, a quarter of the world's land surface area is degraded. A recent satellite survey found we are losing farmland at a rate of about 1% per year due to a combination of erosion, urban sprawl, mining, recreation, toxic pollution and rising sea levels. We're losing 750 tonnes of topsoil every second. Now, if we've already lost 24% of our farmland and we go on losing at a rate of 1% a year, you can work out for yourself how much is going to be left on which to double food production and what sort of yields you might have to get to do that. That the world may actually have passed peak farmland is evidenced in the data, the little graph at the bottom left-hand corner there, that I extracted from the FAO statistical database. The area of world farmland has been contracting steadily for the last decade. Okay, I don't know why that is, because commodity prices are relatively high at the moment, so you'd have thought the signal to increase the area would be there, but it's not. Farmland is shrinking. So I think we're seeing the start of a trend here. What is causing it? Well, you know, by the 2030s, there are going to be cities of 20, 30 and 40 million people. Enormous conurbations. If you add them all together, their area, the area they take up with asphalt and concrete, it will equal a land area the size of China. And if you add on to that their playground, that's the bit round the outside where people play golf and ride horses and things like that, that's going to take up an area of land the size of America. And all of that land is prime farmland because cities are naturally situated in river valleys and on coastal plains. Right? So that is land that will never see the plough again unless something changes. The other thing about that, which people are not factoring in, is that every hectare you take on an urban perimeter, every hectare you take out has to be replaced with 4 or 5 hectares of land in a droughtier, less reliable, more food insecure region of the world. Okay, so we're causing soil erosion out in the marginal country by expanding our cities. This is something that needs to be thought about. It's a serious thing. Now, the other factor that we also need to consider is that these cities are radically different from the cities of yesterday. Most of them produce next to none of their own food. It all comes every night on a river of trucks to restock the shops. Well, what happens to a city of 30 million people if that river of trucks doesn't arrive? You know, maybe there's an oil crisis, maybe there's a local war, maybe just like the floods in Queensland, the trucks can't get through because the roads are out. We know from the Queensland experience within 3 days the supermarkets were empty. Now, what happens to a city of 30 million people a week after the trucks don't arrive? It is time that we rethink our cities. Another aspect of this is that we are currently losing about 90% of our nutrients. Okay? For the last 10,000 years, the last 200 generations, farmers have recycled nutrients. And then, post-World War II, we got onto this fertiliser thing, and what we do is we hemorrhage nutrients all along the way. You lose some of them on farm, you lose some of them in processing, you lose some of them in cooking, the shops throw them away, the restaurants throw them away, consumers throw them away, and we all dump, well, a lot of us dump our sewage in the ocean. Okay, we have created a total open-ended system that just bleeds nutrients. And, you know, that has to be changed. It is not sustainable in the long run. Why? Because we are running into peak phosphorus. I mean, all that says is that, like oil, mined phosphorus is finite. Mined potash is finite. And because it's finite, as supply starts to overtake demand, it's going to get bloody expensive. Right? So we need to start thinking about this one now. Countries like Australia need a national nutrient plan now, before it hits us. Okay? Because the world's phosphorus supply is in the hands of 3 countries. Morocco, the United States and China has just closed the door because they need it for their farmers. Okay, so it's in much fewer hands than oil. So this is a perilous situation, and we need to start thinking hard about this. The flip side of this is you see that beautiful trolley full of food there, supermarket trolley. That is what the average Australian family, American family and European family throws in the garbage every month. 1/3 of your efforts, ladies and gentlemen, are being sent to landfill. This is an absolutely crazy thing. I know what my grandmother would say about this. You know, she would be horrified. She would be aghast. You know, it does not make sense. We are the first generation in all of human history to throw away our food. How stupid are we? Okay. Basically, we have to start thinking about that as a resource. We have to end that. I know people are starting to talk about it, but nothing much is actually happening at the present time. We know about peak oil. It actually happened in 2006, according to the International Energy Agency. Right, so we've had peak land in 2000, peak oil in 2006. All that means is that discoveries of oil are not managing to run ahead of demand. Demand is currently exceeding the rate of new discoveries by about 4-fold at the moment. And yet there will be 61 million new cars on the world's roads this year. Okay, so we're gobbling this stuff up like there is no tomorrow. Every one of us eats about 66 barrels of oil a year. That's the oil content of the modern agricultural system. Now, farm fuels are much talked about, but look, globally they are not a solution. They may have some relevance locally, but globally, if farmers grew enough for their own needs, they would cut the world's food production by 10%, just right when we're trying to double it. And if they grew enough for the needs of the truckers to take it into the supermarkets, that would cut world food production by 1/3. You can imagine what might happen to food prices. So, you know, we have not solved this problem. The next food crisis could be next week, if the Arab Spring suddenly appeared in Saudi Arabia, or it could be next decade. But we know from history it is going to happen. It's not a possibility, it's a likelihood. We need a new energy source, particularly for agriculture. Could be hydrogen, could be solar-powered tractors. People are playing around with them. It could be algal biodiesel. Maybe you diversify into a bit of algae farming or something like that. But we have not solved this problem, and we are going to be taken by surprise by it if we don't get onto it now. Peak fish was in 2004, according to the FAO. The world's fish catch has actually been going downhill in the last 6 years. Okay, now let's assume that all those fisheries get managed sustainably. Big assumption, but still. We are not going to be able to double fish production from the oceans. We're not going to get another 100 million tonnes. So that's 100 million tonnes of protein we're going to have to get off the land. Could be out of fish. That 100 million tonnes is going to take 1 billion tonnes of grain to feed the livestock. And if you add that to the amount of meat that the FAO says we're all going to be eating, extra meat, another 185 million tonnes, that's basically we're going to have to find 3 billion tonnes. That is the equivalent of discovering 3 more North Americas. Okay, that gives you an idea. It's just a way of depicting the magnitude of the challenge that lies before us. Now, this is all happening at a time, when the climate is becoming somewhat unreliable. Our crops and our farming systems are adapted to climates which are about to become extinct, is how Kerry Fowler, who runs the Svalbard Sea Vault, puts it. Basically, the Britain's Hadley Centre got one of the world's better climate models, ran it back through the 20th century, ran it forward through the 21st, and got 40% of the world in drought by the end of this century. Okay, it's only a climate model, but it's a worry. It's also, I might point out, as this being one of the more droughty states in Australia, a huge opportunity for farmers who know how to handle drought. Okay, the rest of the world doesn't. People who have farmed successfully in this state are masters at handling drought. So there is a flip side here, which is very important. The soil moisture thing indicates that we're probably not going to get a lot more production out of Brazil. Some people are saying Brazil is the answer to all our prayers. I doubt it. The scientific consensus at the moment says possibly climate change is going to cost us about a quarter of our food supply by the latter part of the century. So all that says is we've got to run harder just to stand still. Okay, so it's another ball and chain around our ankles that we have to plan for now. Okay, now this is the challenge that your daughters and sons and grandchildren will face if they're in farming by the mid part of the century. They're going to have to double food production under all of those constraints. But let me say this. This is a mighty opportunity. This is a mighty opportunity for countries who have an efficient, creative, innovative farming sector. We heard today that $12 billion of exports from this state alone. I'm prepared to bet that by 2050 you'll be earning $2 or $3 billion from a new rural commodity, the one that's between your ears. Okay, that's going to be. I know South Australia's had a few goes at this in the past, but now's the time to get serious about exporting agricultural knowledge, because the world is going to need it big time. And the people who are there, first in best dressed, will be the people who prosper from it. Okay, so the knowledge component of agriculture, the knowledge of how you farm in difficult climates, is going to be very precious. One of the things we're asking the world's farmers to do is to do this with less knowledge. In actual fact, governments everywhere have been cutting back on agricultural science. If you look at that red line on the right-hand side, that's international real investment in agricultural research. It looks like the cardiac trace of a dead patient. There's been almost no new investment since the 1970s. But what are we thinking of, ladies and gentlemen? Today, out of every science dollar, only 1.8 cents is invested in farming and food production. That is how unimportant the governments of the world think this issue is. Okay, that is a real metric for how important they think it is. That's what tells you. Unless you're seeing your state and your nation doubling agricultural research investment, they are not serious about solving the food production. Can we solve it? Yes, I believe we can. We can more than double food investment in food science to $160 billion a year. How? The world currently spends $1.6 trillion on weapons every year. Okay, so we're talking about 1/10 of the world's weapons spend would fix the problems in agriculture globally. Now, the reason we need to think about this is if we don't, we are going to get more war. We know that shortages of food lead to conflict. And this map from the British Ministry of Defence shows you how all the conflicts of the last 30 years, those little yellow stars, have been focused in areas that are food, land and water insecure. These are the sparks that ignite the racial or political or ethnic differences that people fight over. Okay? Darfur started as an agricultural argument. Rwanda started as an agricultural argument. Somalia is a never-ending cycle of drought and agricultural failure and war, you know. So these things go round and round. We know from history that the French king lost his head because there was a bread crisis in France. We know that the Tsar lost his life because there was a bread crisis in Russia. These things topple governments. Okay, they bring governments down. Food insecurity is critical to political stability. We heard about, the Minister mentioned about the amount of food riots there's been. Actually, in 2008 it was 37 countries had food riots. This year we saw governments torn down in two countries, in Egypt and Tunisia, out of riots that started as bread protests. You know, this lady's got pita bread and an onion in her hand. That's been the Egyptian staple diet since they built the pyramids. That's how they paid the workers who built the pyramids, by the way. So, you know, she's upset with her government, and her upset communicated itself to the society at large. Now that's what's likely to happen if food prices become unaffordable. And just have a look at the graph there. We are now nominally at the highest food prices in history. So that graph's going to kick up and down, as it always does, but it's going to keep on kicking upwards over time, unless we address these issues that I'm referring to. The other side of this is, you know, we talk about refugees, you know, 43 million of them, but underneath that there's 205 million legal migrants, all coming out of countries that are food, land and water insecure, looking for a safe home. That's 250 million human beings on the move every single year. This is the largest mass migration in history. And if any of those countries do actually sustain a serious famine or food crisis, those numbers are going to multiply big time. You know, if there's a failure of the water on the Indo-Gangetic Plain or the North China Plain, we're talking about migratory pressure in the tens or hundreds of millions of people. Okay, so countries like Australia cannot be isolated from trends like that. So we need to start thinking about how we secure food, not just here, but also over there too. Okay, now let me have a look at some of the solutions briefly. We have to reinvent farming. Okay, we have to develop a new eco-agriculture that is going to produce more food with less inputs of land, water, fuel, chemicals, whatever. Okay, we need our best brains. We need a conversation among farmers worldwide how we do this. We also need to reinvent the global diet, and you know, not least because a half of Australians, a half of Americans now die from a diet-related disease. Okay, the current diet we've got is not a healthy diet. So we've got to invent a diet that is more sustainable and healthier at the same time. And of course we need to reinvent our cities. We need to double the investment that we're making in R&D. It's not a lot of money, ladies and gentlemen, in comparison with you know, what we're spending on other things like weapons. We've got to understand that food science is defence spending. And likewise, we invest more in food, we actually get more peace. There is a peace dividend from agriculture, from successful... You may have noticed on the other map there were no wars in Australia or North America or Europe. The places that have got food surpluses don't have conflicts. Okay, so this is an important thing for the strategic thinkers in our governments to take on board. Let's talk about some of the new industries. I believe the answer to those starving gigantic cities is going to be urban agriculture. It's taking off like wildfire in America, in China, in all sorts of places. Agriculture is coming back into the cities. Why? Because cities have got a lot of spare water and they've got a hell of a lot of nutrients, and it can be recycled into agriculture. The nice thing, I know this isn't how you do farming, you know, but the nice thing about it is it's fairly immune to climate. Okay, so you can grow regular harvests of vegetables and things like that, and maybe even livestock in urban settings, if the economics are right. I think there's going to be a lot more of this. You know, systems like aquaponics, where you grow tilapia and vegetables or something like that together. Hospitals in America are growing fresh vegetables on their roofs now to feed to patients as part of the healthy diet to help them recover from surgery and so on. So there's a lot of this starting to go on, you know, and I think it's going to be a farm diversification in future. You know, if you've got a pastoral property, a wheat belt farm and a city farm, then, you know, you'd be nicely hedged climate-wise. Another side of this is that I believe those giant cities will probably be eating biocultures. These are huge cultures of microbes, plant cells, fungal cells, maybe animal cells as well. Don't sneer at this. It may not sound very gourmet, but it will feed an awful lot of people. I think one way to think about it, if you're a farmer, is that the livestock and the crops are actually the same, but they're very, very small. You know, and so again, this is a diversification. This is somewhere where you might hedge your other operations. You might, you know, get the upmarket price for your beef or something like that, but you might also have something like this going, and you might ensure that wastes flow into that industry from other sectors. I'm here now calling for a worldwide war on waste. Let us end this stupid trashing of our food. You know, it is basic to our survival. Right. Today's diet, ladies and gentlemen, is incredibly boring compared to what it's going to be. We eat about 200 or 300 different plants. There are 23,000 edible plants so far catalogued on planet Earth. In Australia, we farm maybe 6 of our native plants, half a dozen or so. There are 6,100 edible Australian plants. So there's a huge agricultural adventure and a culinary adventure here. So in 50 years' time, our diet and our farming systems are going to be much more diverse. We've got to work out how to do this. It's got to be economic. It will also be healthier, because a lot of those vegetables contain things that might clear up your diabetes and so forth. But I'm just saying, we have scarcely tapped the opportunities that really exist in this world for novel crops and indeed novel livestock. I believe humans will still want to eat meat. They will always want to eat meat. But if grain prices go very high and fuel prices, then I would see cattle going back to the pastoral country and sheep going back to the pastoral country, because there you can produce beautiful, clean, organic, healthy product, very, very expensive product. I mean, we're talking about $150 a kilo, ladies and gentlemen. You know, this is the caviar of meats. You will run these animals with precision pastoralism and techniques that are sustainable. Why? So that you can green the landscape. You can rehydrate the landscape. We can soak up more of that water that is currently going straight back into the sky in evaporation. And above all, we can recarbonise it, because the rangelands are a third of the Earth's surface. Okay, there's a huge potential for carbon lock-up there, even if it's only small amounts of carbon per hectare. There's a lot of hectares. So the opportunity to do this and contribute to the climate is very large. In our deserts, again, there are concepts where you can just use sunlight and salt water to produce fresh water and to grow crops. Again, it depends on the economics and how close you are to a big city and so on, but sunlight and seawater, well, Australia's got plenty of both. But if we are going to do this, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have to change the attitudes of humans towards food, okay? 8 billion people living in cities will never set foot on a farm in their lives. If they don't respect the food and what you do when you produce it, they will send the wrong economic signals to you. They will eat badly. They will contribute to the degradation of agriculture. Okay, so I'm calling now for a full year of food in every junior school on the planet. And I would like Australia to be the leader in bringing that about. And this is a year where everything you study, whether it's mathematics or science or social studies or sport, is taught through the lens of food. So when you study sport, you learn what's a healthy diet, how you get your energy. When you study science, you learn about how plants and animals reproduce and what they need for their comfort and survival. So we need to put food back in. Once upon a time, every human being knew something about food. Today they don't. It's just stuff they buy, consume and waste. So I'm calling on everybody, farmers, chefs, celebrity chefs, health departments, supermarkets, to join hands on this one and teach people what is a healthy and sustainable diet, a diet that supports the farming landscape that produced it. The other thing is that we really do need to change the economics of agriculture. The current signal is telling farmers to grow less, not grow more, because for most farmers around the world, farming is an unprofitable activity. Okay? You will not get the amount of investment we need to double food production. We will not get the capital in agriculture unless agriculture is seen to be profitable. But at the moment, as we know, the price is being screwed down by some giant corporations who buy the product, and at the same time, your costs are being screwed up by other giant corporations, and farmers of the world are caught in the middle here. Okay, so we have to do something serious to change this. There are a number of ways that you could do this to change the signal. I don't have time to discuss them here, but we can talk about it in question time if you like. The other thing to note is, of course, cheap food is partly what's killing the consumers. I mean, they're buying a lot of garbage, and that's what's, you know, making them obese and starting their diabetes and feeding their cancers and things like that. So, you know, in actual fact, it's bad for consumers. Cheap food is bad for consumers as well as for farmers. So, conversely, you're paying just a little more and eating just a little less can secure the world's food supply, and it can enable farmers to safeguard the productive systems which we rely on. Finally, I would say it is Australia. You know, we of all countries have the opportunity to lead in this respect. This is a great adventure, ladies and gentlemen, and it really is our golden opportunity, I think, to shine, to contribute to human history, to design new, healthier and more sustainable diets, to design the eco-farming that I meant about. And I know hundreds of farmers who are already trying this out and sharing knowledge amongst themselves. You know, there's a great conversation going on in agriculture at the present time. We also need to figure out how to change that price signal. This is an inspiring challenge, ladies and gentlemen. It is one on which depends the future prosperity, security, stability, peace and happiness of civilization. It represents our great opportunity to contribute as a people meaningfully to the human destiny. So let us be the world leaders in avoiding and defeating the coming famines. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Wow. Fascinating presentation, and a rather grim picture at first, to be honest, but I'm glad you had some solutions. I think everyone in this room is probably glad there were some solutions there. I think when you started talking about peak land and peak fish and peak oil and peak water and peak phosphorus, you start to wonder whether you actually can recover from that in the first place. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned that we need to rethink our cities. I think the figure was by 2050 the total area of farmland buried under cities may exceed the total landmass of China. Also found it interesting the $1.6 trillion spent on weapons, and a lot more money needs to go into R&D, and I guess that's very much reflected here in this stage, and I'm sure there'll be a few questions from the floor in relation to how we can actually get more money into R&D later on this afternoon. And the other thing, when you talked about solutions, need to go more into urban farming. I'd like to hear more about biocultures. That sounds fascinating. And especially a food year in every junior school on the planet. And we've just received word that SAF will facilitate the first food year in South Australia. So it's already got kick-started in this state, so it's good to hear that. But I'm sure there'll be plenty of discussion from the floor at midday today when you have a chance to ask your questions to Julian Cribb. So thank you very much for that fascinating presentation.